Springfield, Massachusetts, the 18th day of April, 1958. This is a field recording of the poems of Sylvia Plath. A copy of this recording has been deposited with the Poetry Archive of the Library of Congress. This is Lee Anderson speaking. Sylvia Plath.
Black rook in rainy weather. On the stiff twig up there hunches a wet black rook, arranging and rearranging its feathers in the rain. I do not expect a miracle or an accident to set the sight on fire in my eye. I seek no more in the desultory weather some design, but let spotted leaves fall as they fall without ceremony or portent. Although I admit I desire occasionally some back talk from the mute sky, I can't honestly complain. A certain minor light may still leap incandescent out of kitchen table or chair, as if a celestial burning took possession of the most obtuse objects now and then, thus hallowing an interval otherwise inconsequent by bestowing largesse, honor, one might say love. At any rate, I now walk wary, for it could happen even in this dull, ruinous landscape, skeptical yet politic, ignorant of whatever angel may choose to flare suddenly at my elbow. I only know that a rook, ordering its black feathers, can so shine as to seize my senses, haul my eyelids up, and grant a brief respite from fear of total neutrality. With luck trekking stubborn through this season of fatigue, I shall patch together a content of sorts. Miracles occur, if you care to call those spasmodic tricks of radiance miracles. The wait's begun again, the long wait for the angel, for that rare, random descent. The Earthenware Head. Fired in sanguine clay, the model head fit nowhere. Brick dust complected, eye under a dense lid, on the long bookshelf it stood, stolidly propping thick volumes of prose, spite-set ape of her look. Best rid hearthstone at once of the outrageous head, still she would not junk it. No place, it seemed, for the effigy to sit on its pillared neck in peace. Rough boys, spying an extra pate, glowering sullen and pompous from an ash-heap, might well seize this prize, maltreat the hostage head in shocking ways, and rouse the sly nerve up that knits to each original its coarse copy. A dark tarn she thought of then, thick silted, with weeds obscured, to serve her exacting turn, but out of the watery aspic, laurelled by fins, the simulacrum leered, lewdly beckoning, and her courage wavered. She blenched as one who drowns, and resolved more ceremoniously to lodge the mimic head in a crotched willow, green vaulted by foliage. Let bell-tongued birds descant in blackest feather on the rendering, grain by grain, of that uncouth shape to simple sod again, through drear and dulcet weather. Yet, shrined on her shelf, the grisly visage endured, despite her wrung hands, her tears, her praying vanish. Steadfast and evil-starred, it ogled through rock fault, wind flaw, and fisted wave, an antique haghead too tough for knife to finish, refusing to diminish by one jot its basilisk look of love.
It goes with it your vocabulary, and your imagination.
But I like his voice and speech.
Good, I'm glad it comes over.
Will you go on?
Departure of the Ghost. Enter the chilly no-man's land of precisely 5 o'clock in the morning. The no-color void with a waking head rubbishes out the draggled lot of sulphurous dreamscapes and obscure lunar conundrums which seemed, when dreamed, to mean so profoundly much, gets ready to face the ready-made creation of chairs and bureaus and sleep-twisted sheets. This is the kingdom of the fading apparition, the oracular ghost who dwindles on pin legs to a knot of laundry, with a classic bunch of sheets upraised as a hand emblematic of farewell. At this joint between two worlds and two entirely incompatible modes of time, the raw material of our meat and potato thoughts assumes the nimbus of ambrosial revelation, and so departs. But as chair and bureau are the hieroglyphs of some godly utterance wakened heads ignore, so these posed sheets, before they thin to nothing, speak in sign language of a lost other world, a world we lose by merely waking up into sanity. The common ghosts crowed out, worms riddling its tongue, or walks for Hamlet all day on the printed page, or bodies itself for dowagers in draughty castles at 12, or inhabits the crystal of the sick man's eye, trailing its telltale tatters only at the outermost fringe of mundane vision. But this ghost goes, hand aloft, goodbye, goodbye, not down into the rocky gizzard of the earth, but toward the region where our thick atmosphere diminishes, and God knows what is there. A point of exclamation marks that sky in ringing orange like a stellar carrot. Its round period, displaced and green, suspends beside it the first point, the starting point of Eden next the new moon's curve. Go, ghost of our mother and father, ghost of us, and ghost of our dreams' children, in those sheets which signify our origin and end, to the cloud-cuckoo land of color wheels and pristine alphabets and cows that moo and moo as they jump over moons as new as that crisp cusp toward which you voyage now. Hail and farewell, hello, goodbye, O keeper of the profane grail, the dreaming skull.
When did you write that?
Oh, spring vacation. Why? Very recently, really. Mm.
What are your working habits? Do you concentrate for 3 or 4 days on a poem, or 2 or 3 months?
No, I do it very quickly somehow. I mean, I don't eat or bother with anything while I'm working on it, and I generally have somehow thought about it before. It's not as if I mean, I've had a subject, like I had the subject of the idea for this one for a long time without writing on it at all. And when I wrote it pretty much all in a very short space, a day or 2 days, I mean, all the time.
Well, that's Captain Ann Porter's.
With nothing else, doing nothing else, morning, noon, and night, he was howling for supper, and I wouldn't make him any. The Disquieting Muses. Mother, mother, what ill-bred aunt, or what disfigured and unsightly cousin did you so unwisely keep unasked to my christening, that she sent these ladies in her stead, with heads like darning eggs, to nod and nod and nod at foot and head, and at the left side of my crib? Mother, who made such lovely stories of Mixie Blackshort, the hero bear, mother whose witches always, always got baked into gingerbread, I wonder whether you saw them, whether you said words to rid me of those 3 ladies, nodding by night around my bed, mouthless, eyeless, with stitched bald head. In the hurricane when father's 12 study windows bellied in like bubbles about to break, you fed my brother and me cookies and Ovaltine, and helped us somewhat thinly choir, Thor is angry, boom, 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 Thor is angry, we don't care. But those ladies broke the panes. When on tiptoe the schoolgirls danced, blinking flashlights like fireflies and singing the glowworm's song. I could not lift a foot in the twinkle dress, but heavy-footed stood aside in the shadow cast by my dismal-headed godmothers, and you cried and cried, and the shadow stretched, the lights went out. Mother, you sent me to piano lessons and praised my arabesques and trills, although each teacher found my touch oddly wooden in spite of scales and the hours of practicing, my ear tone-deaf and yes, unteachable. I learned elsewhere from muses unhired by you, dear mother. I woke one day to see you, mother, floating above me in bluest air, on a green balloon bright with 1,000,000 flowers and bluebirds that never were, never found anywhere. But the little planet bobbed away like a soap bubble, as you called, "Come here," and I faced my travelling companions. Day now, night now, at head, side, feet, they stand their vigil in gowns of stone, faces blank as the day I was born, their shadows long in the setting sun that never brightens or goes down. And this is the kingdom you bore me to, mother, mother, but no frown of mine will betray the company I keep.
When did you write that one?
Spring vacation. It's actually the only time I've had to write for a very long time, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not teaching next year, because I found it really impossible to write while I was working and teaching. And also the kind of analysis I do with my classes is somehow inimical to the sort of work I do by myself. So I feel that actually I do want to spend a year just writing and eating and sleeping when it happens, but writing most of the time, yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
What poets do you read for pleasure?
Well, Yeats.
Outside of Ted Hughes.
Ted Hughes continually, and Yeats, Eliot, John Crow Ransom especially. I have started reading Robert Lowell. I like a good deal in Robert Lowell. And then, let's see, Shakespeare, Chaucer, who else? Thomas Wyatt. Who else, Ted, you know? Hopkins, yes, Gerard Manley Hopkins. And let's see, what others? I think Yeats is, I like very, very much, in particular one of my favorites.
Do you feel that your work has been influenced by anyone in particular?
I find that hard to say. It's so queer. Does it remind you of something?
No, but I wondered if you felt there was any particular...
Well, the strange thing, I think of anything, for instance, I mean, I'd never say that this last poem was influenced by Yeats, but for instance, I learned my first changing in sound, assonance and consonants from Yeats, which I mean actually is technical. I was very excited when I discovered this. I also read Dylan Thomas a good deal for the subtleties of sound. I'd never worked with anything except rhyme before, and very rigid rhyme, and so I began developing schemes and patterns of sound that were somehow less obvious, but you get them through your ear, if not through your eye. And I think that I just happened to learn this from Yeats, and Thomas too, in a way.
Well, are you ready to read another poem?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Battle scene from the comic operatic fantasy, The Seafarer. It beguiles this little odyssey in pink and lavender over a surface of gently graded turquoise tiles that represent a sea with checkered waves and gaily bear up the seafarer, gaily, gaily, in his pink plume and armor. A fairy tale gondola of paper ferries the fish pond Sinbad, who poises his pastel spear toward 3 pinky purple monsters which uprear off the ocean floor with fanged and dreadful head. Beware, beware, the whale, the shark, the squid. But fins and scales of each scrolled sea beast troll no slime, no weed. They are polished for the joust. They gleam like Easter eggshells, rose and amethyst. Ahab, fulfill your boast. Bring home each storied head. One thrust, one thrust, one thrust, and they are dead. So fables go, and so all children sing their bathtub battles deep, hazardous and long. But oh, sage grown-ups know sea dragon for sofa, fang for pasteboard, and siren song for fever in a sleep. Laughing, laughing of grey beards wakes us up. On the decline of oracles. My father kept a speckled conch by two bronze bookends of ships in sail, and as I listened its cold teeth seethed with voices of that ambiguous sea old Birkeland missed, who held a shell to hear the sea he could not hear. What the seashell spoke to his inner ear he knew, but no peasants know. My father died, and when he died, he willed his books and shell away. The books burned up, sea took the shell, but I keep the voices he set in my ear, and in my eye the sight of those blue unseen waves for which the ghost of Birkeland grieves. The peasants feast and multiply, and never need see what I see. In the temple of broken stones, above a worn curtain, rears the white head of a god or madman. Nobody knows which or dares ask. From him I have tomorrow's gossip and doldrums. So much is vision good for. Like a persistent stitch in the side it nags, is tedious. Straddling a stool in the third-floor window booth of the Alexandra house of a petty curé, I regard with some fatigue the smoky rooms of the restaurant opposite. See impose itself on the cook at the steaming stove, a picture of what's going to happen. I've to wait it out. It will come. It comes. 3 barely known men are coming up a stair. This veils both stove and cook. One is pale with orange hair. Behind glasses the second's eyes are blurred. The third walks leaning on a stick and smiling. These trivial images invade the cloistral eye like pages from a gross comic strip. And toward the happening of this happening the earth turns now. In half an hour I shall go down the shabby stair and meet coming up those 3. Worth less than present, past, this future, worthless such vision to eyes gone dull, that once descried Troy's towers fall, saw evil break out of the north. Poem for Paul Clay's Perseus, the Triumph of Wit over Suffering. Head alone shows you in the prodigious act of digesting what centuries alone digest, the mammoth lumbering statuary of sorrow, indissoluble enough to riddle the guts of a whale with holes and bleed him white into salt seas. Hercules had a simple time rinsing those stables. A baby's tears would do it. But who'd volunteer to gulp the Laocoon, the dying Gaul, and those innumerable pietas festering on the dim walls of Europe's chapels, museums, and sepulchres? You who borrowed feathers for your feet, not lead, not nails, and a mirror to keep the snaky head in safe perspective, could outface the Gorgon grimace of human agony. A look to numb limbs, not a basilisk blink nor a double whammy, but all the accumulated last grunts, groans, cries, and heroic couplets, concluding the million enacted tragedies on these blood-soaked boards, and every private twinge a hissing asp to petrify your eyes, and every village catastrophe a writhing length of cobra, and the decline of empires the thick coil of a vast anaconda. Imagine the world fisted to a fetus head, ravined, seamed with suffering from conception upwards, and there you have it in hand. Grit in the eye or a sore thumb can make anyone wince, but the whole globe expressive of grief turns gods like kings to rocks. Those rocks, cleft and worn, themselves then grow ponderous, and extend despair on earth's dark face. So might rigor mortis come to stiffen all creation, were it not for a bigger belly still than swallow's joy. You enter now, armed with feathers to tickle as well as fly, and a fun-house mirror that turns the tragic muse to the beheaded head of a sullen doll, one braid a bedraggled snake, hanging limp as the absurd mouth hangs in its lugubrious pout. Where are the classic limbs of stubborn Antigone, the red royal robes of Phaedra, the tear-dazzled sorrows of Malfi's gentle duchess? Gone in the deep convulsion gripping your face, muscles and sinews bunched, victorious, as the cosmic laugh does away with the unstitching, plaguey wounds of an eternal sufferer. To you, Perseus, the palm, and may you poise and repoise until time stop, the celestial balance which weighs our madness with our sanity.
You seem to be an extremely scrupulous prosthetist. You take a great interest in...
Well, how do you mean? How do you mean?
Well, from the standpoint of watching your syllables, your feet, your beat as you go along.
I suppose, well, I suppose, you know.
Does she read? Does she do? Does she read?
I think so. That comes through very beautifully.
Does it? Because I don't want to stop, and yet somehow I want it to be there, you know, because the lines don't end, they go on, and yet they do end in a way.
I can always tell when she's composing, she's going like that. She doesn't know she's doing it.
On the difficulty of conjuring up a Dryad. Ravening through the persistent bric-a-brac of blunt pencils, rose-sprigged coffee cup, postage stamps, stacked books, clamour and yop, neighbourhood cock-crow, all nature's prodigal back-talk, the vaunting mind snubs impromptu spiels of wind and wrestles to impose its own order on what is. With my fantasy alone brags the importunate head, arrogant among rook-tongued spaces, sheep greens, finned falls. I shall compose a crisis to stun sky blackout, drive gibbering mad trout, cock, ram, that bulk so calm on my jealous stare, self-sufficient as they are. But no hocus-pocus of green angels damasks with dazzle the threadbare eye. My trouble, doctor, is I see a tree, and that damn scrupulous tree won't practice wiles to beguile sight, e.g. by cant of light concoct a Daphne. My tree stays tree. However I wrench obstinate bark and trunk to my sweet will, no luminous shape steps out radiant in limb, eye, lip, to hoodwink the honest earth, which point-blank spurns such fiction as nymphs. Cold vision will have no counterfeit palmed off on it. No doubt now in dream-propertied fall some moon-eyed, star-lucky sleight-of-hand man watches my jilting lady squander coin, gold leaf-stocked ditches, and the opulent air goes studded with seed, while this beggared brain hatches no fortune, but from leaf, from grass, thieves what it has.
Do you hear the music, or do you get the image in starting a poem? Is there some kind of a rhythm that goes...
It's very funny, because I haven't an ear for music, but I hear the music and the rhythm, which somehow I don't think about, you know? It's funny. I have a visual imagination. For instance, my inspiration is paintings and not music when I go to some other art form. What do you think, Ted? I mean, I see these things very clearly, and I have visual images, and yet the sound itself is terrifically strong.
Yes, it is.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yes, I tell you. That's the great pleasing quality of it.
I mean, I feel ideally I'd like to be musical without being artificial, which I think is sometimes difficult, and to be able to speak out, you know, straight out the way you talk, which is, again, is terrifically hard, while getting all the illusions and richness in that you get in rhetoric, which, you know, I mean, it's like eating cake and wanting to have it, I guess. November Graveyard. The scene stands stubborn. Skinflint trees hoard last leaves, won't mourn, wear sackcloth, or turn to elegiac dryads, and dour grass guards the hard-hearted emerald of its grassiness, however the grandiloquent mind may scorn such poverty. So no dead men's cries, flower forget-me-nots, between the stone paving this grave ground. Here's honest rot to unpick the elaborate heart, pare bone free of the fictive vein. When one stark skeleton bulks real, all saints' tongues fall quiet. Flies watch no resurrections in the sun. At the essential landscape stare till your eyes foist a vision dazzling on the wind. Whatever lost ghosts flare, damned, howling in their shrouds across the moor, rave on the leash of the starving mind which peoples the bare room, the blank, untenanted air. Sow. God knows how our neighbor managed to breed his great sow. Whatever his shrewd secret, he kept it hid in the same way he kept the sow, impounded from public stare, prize ribbon, and pig-show. But one dusk our questions commended us to a tour through his lantern-lit maze of barns to the lintel of the sunk sty door to gape at it. Behold, no rose and larkspurred china suckling with a penny slot for thrifty children, nor dolt pig, ripe for heckling, about to be glorified for prime flesh and golden crackling in a parsley halo, nor even one of the common barnyard sows, mire-smirched, blousy, munching thistle and knotweed on her snout cruise, bloat ton of milk on the move, hedged by a litter of feet-foot ninnies, shrilling her hulk to halt for a swig at the pink tits. No, this vast Brobdingnag bulk of a sow lounged belly-bedded on that black compost, fat rutted eyes dream-filmed. What a vision of ancient hoghood must thus wholly engross the great grandam. Our marvel blazoned a-night in glittering guise, unhorsed and shredded in the grove of combat by a grisly bristled boar, fabulous enough to straddle that sow's heat. But our farmer whistled, then with a jocular fist thwacked the barrel nape, and the green copse castled pig hove, letting legend like dried mud drop slowly, grunt on grunt, up in the flickering light to shape a monument, prodigious in gluttonies as that hog whose want made lean lent of kitchen slops, and, stomaching no constraint, proceeded to swill the seven-troughed seas and every earth-quaking continent. Spinster. Now this particular girl, during a ceremonious April walk with her latest suitor, found herself, of a sudden, intolerably struck by the birds' irregular babble and the leaves' litter. By this tumult afflicted, she observed her lover's gestures unbalance the air, his gait stray uneven through a rank wilderness of fern and flower. She judged petals in disarray, the whole season sloven. How she longed for winter then, scrupulously austere in its order of white and black, ice and rock, each sentiment within border, and heart's frosty discipline exact as a snowflake. But here a burgeoning unruly enough to pitch her 5 queenly wits into vulgar motley, a treason not to be borne, let idiots reel giddy in bedlam spring, she withdrew neatly. And round her house she set such a barricade of barb and check against mutinous weather as no mere insurgent man could hope to break with curse, fist, threat, or love either.
Tell us about the prize.
What's this?
Didn't you get a prize for, what was the name of it?
You don't mean for Poetry Chicago, do you?
Is that it?
Well, I got one from Poetry Chicago this fall, I guess, for some poems I had in that. But actually, that's the only one I can think of recently.
You mean the one I mentioned from the Spinster, please?
Yeah.
Oh, but that was when I read when I was a student, Teddy, you know, a long time. That. This is Sylvia Plath continuing the reading of her poems on Reel 2. On the Plethora of Dryads. Hearing a white saint rave about a quintessential beauty, visible only to the paragon heart, I tried my sight on an apple tree that for eccentric knob and wart had all my love. Without meat or drink I sat, starving my fantasy down, to discover that metaphysical tree which hid from my worldling look its brilliant vein far deeper in gross wood than axe could cut. But before I might blind sense to see with the spotless soul, each particular quirk so ravished me, every pock and stain bulked more beautiful than flesh of any body flawed by love's prince. Battle however I would to break through that patchwork of leaves bicker and whisk in babbled tongues, streak and mottle of torn bark, no visionary lightnings pierced my dense lid. Instead, a wanton fit dragged each dazzled sense apart, surfeiting eye, ear, taste, touch, smell. Now, snared by this miraculous art, I ride earth's burning carousel day in, day out, and such grit corrupts my eyes, I must watch sluttish dryads twitch their multifarious silks in the holy grove, until no chaste tree but suffers blotch under flux of those seductive reds, greens, blues. All the dead deers. Rigged poker stiff on her back with a granite grin, this antique museum-cased lady lies, companioned by the gimcrack relics of a mouse and a shrew that battened for a day on her ankle bone. These three, unmasked now, bear dry witness to the gross eating game we'd wink at if we didn't hear stars grinding, crumb by crumb, our own grist down to its bony face. How they grip us through thin and thick, these barnacle dead. This lady here's no kin of mine, yet kin she is. She'll suck blood and whistle my marrow clean to prove it. As I think now of her head, from the mercury-backed glass, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother reach hag hands to haul me in, and an image looms under the fish-pond surface where the daft father went down with orange duck feet winnowing his hair. All the long-gone darlings, they get back though, soon, soon, be it by wakes, weddings, childbirths, or a family barbecue, any touch, taste, tangs fit for those outlaws to ride home on and to sanctuary, usurping the armchair between tick and tack of the clock, until we go, each skulled and cross-boned Gulliver, riddled with ghosts, to lie deadlocked with them, taking root as cradles rock.
What is your working philosophy?
My working philosophy?
As far as poetry is concerned?
You mean as far as writing poetry goes?
Your own.
About what poetry should be?
Yes.
Well, it's hard to say. My own poetry, technically, as I've said, I'd like it to be extremely musical and lyrical with a singing sound. I don't like poetry that just throws itself away in prose. In other words, I don't like poetry that you could, that is bad prose, and I think a lot of poetry is bad prose. I think there should be a kind of constriction, a kind of tension, which is never artificial and yet keeps in the meaning in a kind of music too. And again, I like the idea of managing to get wit in with seriousness and contrast, ironies, and I like visual images, and I like just good mouthfuls of sound which have meaning. I think that's another thing. I don't like just ramping about in sound, but having a very strong meaning come through the first time. In other words, I'd like people to understand what I'm talking about the first time they read the poem, and to understand it more and more the more they hear it. In other words, to be able to go deeper. But I don't want to baffle anybody. And I suppose that working in my own study, it may be queer to other people. It seems to me very obvious, very ordinary, and I don't know how strange it may sound to ears that aren't accustomed to it. I mean, I have really no idea. I haven't read aloud enough. Very few people have read my poems anyway, so I have no idea how they affect other people. But
you don't consider that it's necessary to write in a strict form in order to get music?
Well, at first I started in a strict form. It's the easiest way, I think, for the beginner to get music ready-made. But I think that now I like to work in forms that are strict, and yet this strictness isn't uncomfortable. Sort of like a comfortable corset or something, I suppose. It isn't really noticeable and obvious, but it's there. There's some bone, some skeletal structure to the poem. And I think that for me, at least, I'm very much lyrically inclined. And I lean very strongly toward forms which are, I suppose, quite rigid in comparison certainly to free verse. I'm much happier when I know that all my sounds are echoing in different ways throughout the poem than if I just forget about it.
That's an important thing, I think. It's not necessary to confine yourself to a lyric in order to get a real sweep of music. You get long lines and they go along.
Yeah,
By the music, and the longer you go on, the more the music builds up.
Yes, and all the time your ear is recording this, although even your eye mightn't see it. I mean, unless you pick it out and stop to pick it out. But I'm sure poetry should be read. That's another thing. I think that a lot of poetry isn't good when you read it because it's made for the eye and it's very ugly to the ear. And I like ugly effects. I mean, one of my favorite sounds is rock, black, and all the words that go against that very hard K sound. And yet, which of course I suppose are ugly if they're all piled up, but they're not to me. But I think that poetry should be able to be read with a good effect to the ear. I suppose I am, very sensuously inclined that way. I like extremely vivid pictures in poetry, not just grey poetry, and I like it very musical, which I guess isn't as fashionable now as it once was.
Well, let's try to make it the fashion that I work on. You have been listening to Sylvia Plath read her poems. This has been a field recording of Sylvia Plath's poems and comments made in Springfield, Massachusetts on the 18th day of April, 1958. A copy of this recording has been deposited with the Poetry Archive of the Library of Congress. Permission for this broadcast has been obtained from the copyright owners. This is Lee Anderson speaking.
This is their letter to Lee Anderson of Glen Rock, Pennsylvania, The intent of it is to put in a formal way the understanding made about the use of tape recordings of my poetry produced by him at his own expense. Lee Anderson has my permission to send my recordings to the Poetry Archive of the Library of Congress to be copied and deposited for reference and scholarly purposes. Any other use by the Library of Congress will require my permission and that of the copyright owners. Lee Anderson also has my permission to dispose of the recordings in any way he may elect, except that they may not be used for paid audiences or sold in reproductions for commercial, non-educational purposes. Should Lee Anderson elect to transfer his collection of tapes to an educational institution, he may include my recordings, and the college or university shall have a host's privilege of use, but specifically shall not use my recordings for commercial reproduction without my own and the copyright owner's permission. This is Sylvia Plath signing off. The date is April 18th, 1958.
And there's one correction, partly at his own expense.